The man who found them almost didn't stop. He was a trail maintenance volunteer for the Willamette National Forest, a retired postal worker named Gerald Fitch, 61 years old, bad knees, a thermos of black coffee strapped to his pack. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of morning where the fog sits so low in the Douglas firs that you can't tell where the tree ends and the sky begins. He had been assigned a 3-mile stretch of the McKenzie River Trail, Section 7, the part nobody hikes in October because the ground turns to soup and the trail markers get swallowed by undergrowth. Gerald was 30 minutes into his section when he smelled it. He said later that he couldn't describe it as a bad smell exactly. It was more like presence, like something large and warm had recently occupied a space nearby. He stopped walking. He stood very still, the way you stand when a sound you haven't consciously heard has already reached some older part of your brain. He stepped off the trail into the ferns. 20 feet in, he found them. 2 young women, sitting with their backs against the trunk of a massive old-growth Douglas fir. Their wrists were bound together, not to the tree but to each other, with what appeared to be strips of their own clothing. Their heads were tilted forward, chins to chests, the way people sleep on airplanes when they've finally given up trying to stay awake. They were breathing, barely, but breathing. Their clothes were intact, but saturated with 3 months of rain, rot, and forest floor. Their hair had grown. Their faces were thin in a way that didn't look like starvation exactly. It looked like time itself had carved something away. Gerald Fitch called 911, then sat down on the wet ground beside them and did not leave until the paramedics arrived 45 minutes later. He held their hands. He said later, "I didn't know if they could hear me, but I talked to them anyway. I told them they were found. I said it over and over. You're found. You're found. You're found." This is the story of how 2 sisters named Mara and Claire Aldren disappeared into the Willamette National Forest on the 22nd of July, and what happened, or what we think happened, during the 93 days they were gone. Mara Aldren was 26 years old when she vanished. The older of the 2 by 3 years, she worked as a graphic designer for a small branding agency in Eugene, Oregon. She was the kind of person people described in that specific way that reveals everything. She was just always there, her co-worker Denise Parr said. Like when Mara was in a room, the room felt accounted for. She had dark auburn hair that she kept in a braid when she worked, and loose when she didn't. She wore wire-rimmed glasses that were slightly too large for her face, which gave her a perpetually searching expression. She drove a 2014 Honda Civic, the color of old moss, and kept a specific brand of spearmint gum in every pocket of every jacket she owned. She called her mother every Sunday. Not texted, called. 15 to 20 minutes without fail. The last call was July 20th, 2 days before the disappearance. Claire Aldren was 23, studying environmental science at the University of Oregon. The younger one, the louder one. Not loud in a disruptive way, but loud in the way that small things sometimes hold more energy than their size suggests. She laughed at things a half second before other people understood why they were funny. She had a field journal she carried everywhere, a battered green Leuchtturm 1917 filled with plant specimens, soil composition notes, and hand-drawn maps of trails she had hiked. She was, by every account, genuinely passionate about forests in a way that wasn't fashionable or performative. She loved the specific weight of old-growth trees. She could tell you the age of a Douglas fir by the texture of its bark. The trip was Claire's idea. She had been planning it since the previous spring. A 5-day backpacking loop through the Three Sisters Wilderness area, roughly 40 miles of trail through some of the most remote terrain in Oregon's Cascade Range. She had filed a trip plan with the Forest Service. She had waterproofed her maps, calibrated her compass, packed enough freeze-dried food for 7 days in case of delays. She had hiked sections of this route before, alone and with others. She knew this forest the way some people know a city neighborhood. Not perfectly, but intimately. Mara had never backpacked overnight before. This was acknowledged by everyone later. Not as criticism, but as context. Mara was not outdoorsy in any particular way. She could walk for miles. She walked to work every day, but technical wilderness travel was something else. She agreed to go because Claire asked her, and because their relationship had always operated on a specific frequency. When Claire was enthusiastic about something, Mara wanted to be part of it. Simple as that. They left Eugene on the morning of July 22nd, a Saturday. Claire drove, her 2009 Subaru Outback packed with gear. They stopped at a gas station outside Springfield, where surveillance footage shows them at the register at 7:14 a.m. Claire buying energy bars and a paper road map, even though she had 3 digital backups. Mara buying a coffee and what appears to be a celebrity gossip magazine, holding it up to Claire with an expression that says, I know, but let me have this. The Subaru was left at the South Sister Trailhead parking lot at approximately 9:30 a.m. The lot attendant, a seasonal employee named Brandon Cole, remembered them. 2 girls, one looked like she knew what she was doing, one looked like she was dressed for a picnic, and confirmed they headed north on the main trail at what he estimated was between 9:45 and 10 a.m. After that, nothing. The trip plan Claire had filed indicated they would exit at the Obsidian Limited Entry Area trailhead after 5 days on July 27th, when the Subaru was still in the parking lot on the morning of July 29th, and no one had heard from either sister. Their mother, Diane Aldren of Corvallis, Oregon, called the Lane County Sheriff's Office. The search began July 30th, 8 days after they walked into the forest. The search was significant by any measure. Over its first 2 weeks, it involved more than 200 volunteer searchers, 6 search dogs, 2 helicopters, and a drone unit operated by a volunteer tech team out of Portland. The Lane County Sheriff's Office coordinated with the U.S. Forest Service, the Oregon Department of Emergency Management, and briefly, the FBI's Portland Field Office, which was brought in to assess whether there was any criminal dimension to the disappearance. There wasn't, or at least nothing that could be established. What the search found in those first 2 weeks was this: a campsite approximately 11 miles from the trailhead, consistent with what Claire would have set up, containing the remains of a small fire, 2 bare canisters with food still inside them, and 1 tent, a 2-person REI half-dome that had been staked and abandoned. Claire's large pack was found near the tent. Inside it, the Greenfield Journal, partially water-damaged but readable, spare clothes, a first aid kit with 2 items used, a packet of moleskin and 1 blister bandage, a backup water filter. Her compass was in the left hip belt pocket. Mara's smaller day pack was not found. The field journal became one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the investigation, such as it was. The last entry was dated July 24th, 2 days after departure, 1 day before the planned date of reaching their first major campsite. The entry read in part, "Longer than expected. M doing well, but knees. Found an alternate. C says she knows it. I trust her. Off trail maybe 2 miles then back. Weather changing. Sky looks wrong. Sky looks wrong." Investigators would spend considerable time parsing those 3 words. Wrong how? Wrong in the way that means incoming weather, which any experienced hiker would recognize, or wrong in some other way that Claire, with her precise observational vocabulary, chose not to articulate further. The alternate route mentioned in the journal was never definitively identified. The area where the campsite was found sits at the intersection of several informal social trails, unmaintained paths worn by years of foot traffic, but not marked on any official map. Claire's map, found in the journal, showed a hand-drawn line that diverged from the main trail and curved northwest into a section of the wilderness that most hikers avoid, a dense, low-drainage forest basin the locals called the Sump. The Sump was searched 3 times. Dogs found nothing. The drone footage showed nothing but canopy. By the 3rd week of August, the formal search was scaled back. By September, it had effectively ended. The case remained open as a missing persons investigation, but without new evidence, there was no operational search to speak of. Their mother, Diane, continued to drive to the trailhead every weekend. She would walk the first 2 miles of trail and stand there and listen. She told a reporter from the Register Guard, "I kept thinking that if I was very quiet, I would hear something. I don't know what. Just something that would tell me which direction. Here is what we know and what we don't. The 93 days between July 22nd and October 23rd, the day Gerald Fitch found them, represent one of the most thoroughly investigated and simultaneously most opaque survival cases in Oregon outdoor history. Both sisters were hospitalized at Peace Health Sacred Heart Medical Center in Eugene. Both were suffering from severe dehydration, significant malnutrition, hypothermia in Claire's case, and what the attending physician described as a form of prolonged stress response that presented similarly to, but was not clinically identical to, PTSD. They were alive. This fact, stated plainly, remains remarkable. 93 days in the Willamette National Forest, including the entirety of Oregon's 2024 wet season onset, with whatever supplies Mara had in her day pack, which investigators later determined had contained a rain poncho, a half-used bottle of ibuprofen, 2 granola bars, a phone with a cracked screen and no signal, a tube of chapstick, and the celebrity gossip magazine she had bought at the gas station. The question of how they survived is partially answered and largely mysterious. When Claire was able to speak, approximately 4 days after being found, once the IV fluids and the warmth and the sleep had done enough work, she gave a statement to investigators that was described by lead detective Rosario Vega as lucid, specific, and deeply incomplete. Claire said this: they had gotten turned around in a section of trail on the afternoon of July 25th, during a period of rapidly dropping visibility. A weather system had moved in faster than any available forecast had predicted. This was later confirmed by meteorological data. The rain was torrential, the kind that doesn't fall so much as arrive, all at once, as if the sky had simply decided. Claire's compass was in her pack, which she had left at the campsite. Mara had the day pack. They had a 2-mile separation from their established camp and, within approximately 45 minutes, had lost all orientation. Claire said she was not afraid at first. She had protocols. She knew the rules. Stop moving, signal, wait. But the rain made signaling impossible, and stopping meant standing in a wet forest with air temperatures dropping toward 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, for reference, cold enough to kill a person who is wet and immobile within a few hours. So they kept moving. The next confirmed location they could describe was a creek, unnamed on any official map, that Claire identified as running roughly west. Following water downhill is basic wilderness survival protocol. They followed it. At some point in the following 24 hours, neither sister could reconstruct the exact timeline, they reached a natural shelter, a massive fallen old-growth Douglas fir whose root ball, torn from the earth, created a protected cavity large enough to sit in. They called it the den. The den became their home base. Claire, with her environmental science background and her fieldwork instincts, began constructing a survival framework almost immediately. She identified edible plants, wood sorrel, miner's lettuce, young fern fronds, several species of mushrooms she was confident about, and several she refused to touch. She found a way to collect and boil water using a tin cup that Mara had at the bottom of her day pack, a stainless steel camping cup neither of them could explain the presence of until Mara remembered she had borrowed it from a friend 2 weeks earlier and forgotten to return it. That cup may have saved both of their lives. Mara's role, from what she described, and Mara spoke to investigators much later than Claire, and much less, and always with the feeling that something was being held back, was maintenance, gathering, keeping the fire. She became, in Claire's telling, extraordinarily good at finding dry wood in a wet forest. She developed a system for caching small amounts of food, hiding it in specific locations around the den, the way animals cache food against future need. She said she stopped thinking about being rescued after approximately 3 weeks. She said, "I stopped waiting. I think that's when I actually started surviving." The question of the tree. Gerald Fitch found them tied to a tree, or more precisely tied to each other. sitting at the base of a tree. Their wrists were bound together with strips torn from what was identified as Claire's base layer thermal shirt. When asked about this, separately in separate interviews, both sisters gave the same answer, almost word for word. Claire said, "So we wouldn't get separated again?" Mara said, "So if one of us went under, the other one couldn't leave." Two answers, same decision. The medical assessment that both sisters were unconscious or near unconscious when found. Not dead, not sleeping, but in a state of profound physical shutdown consistent with prolonged exposure and extreme caloric deficit, suggests that in the days or week before Gerald Fitch found them, their physical condition had deteriorated to a critical level. The survival framework that had kept them alive for nearly 3 months had simply reached its limit. And so, they had tied themselves together and waited. Detective Rosario Vega spent 11 hours interviewing Claire Aldren across 3 sessions in November 2024. She has said in a profile published by Outside Magazine that Claire was one of the most precise witnesses she had ever interviewed, and one of the most selectively precise. Claire could describe in extraordinary detail the color of light through old-growth canopy at different times of day. She could describe exactly how she constructed the den's wind shelter, the precise species of mushroom she had eaten on day 41, the sound the creek made in October versus July. She had, it became clear, been paying extraordinary attention to everything around her for 93 days. There were 3 things she would not discuss. The first, approximately 2 weeks into the disappearance, around August 5th or 6th by the calendar, Claire described hearing something in the forest at night that she classified, without elaboration, as not an animal. When Detective Vega pressed for specifics, Claire said, "I know what animals sound like in this forest. This was different." She did not say what it sounded like. She redirected to another topic and did not return to it. The second, at some point in the middle period of their stay, Claire estimated weeks 5 through 8, she described what she called the visits. Someone, or something, had, on at least 4 separate occasions that she was certain of, left items near the den. Not large items, small ones. A piece of woven bark, a bundle of dried herbs tied with a length of root fiber. Once, a smooth stone with a mark on it that Claire could not identify as either natural formation or intentional carving. She did not know who had left them. She had never seen anyone. She did not believe, she said very carefully, that the items were left by another person in the conventional sense. But she also would not say what she did believe. Detective Vega noted in her report, subject displayed no signs of confabulation or trauma-induced delusion. Her descriptions were consistent across sessions. She was neither embellishing nor, in my assessment, withholding out of fear. She was withholding because she did not have language for what she wanted to say. The third thing Claire would not discuss was the period immediately preceding Gerald Fitch's arrival, the final 7 to 10 days. She described it obliquely as the quiet time. When asked what that meant, she said only, "We had stopped trying to get out. We weren't giving up." It was different from that. It was more like we had gone somewhere and we were waiting to come back. Mara, in her later interview, said something that has been quoted in every subsequent article about the case. She said, "I can't tell you what happened in that forest because I don't have a word for it that exists in English or maybe any language. It was like being in a parenthesis, like being inside the pause between 2 heartbeats. You're not gone. You're just held." There is one detail in Gerald Fitch's initial 911 call and subsequent statements that has never been satisfactorily explained. When Gerald stepped off the trail into the ferns and found the sisters, he described the scene as follows. They were seated at the base of the Douglas fir, wrists bound, eyes closed. The ground around them was clear, not just clear of debris, clear in the way that suggested deliberate arrangement. Dead leaves and forest detritus had been carefully pushed back from a roughly circular area of approximately 8 feet in diameter. The soil inside this circle was bare and dark. At the edge of this circle, at the 4 cardinal compass points, north, south, east, west, there were 4 identical bundles, small, constructed from dried grasses, and what botanists later identified as Pacific yew twigs, bound with root fiber. They were not objects either sister said they had made. When forensic botanists examined the bundles, they determined they had been assembled within 48 hours of discovery, meaning during a period when both Mara and Claire were, by all physical evidence, too weak to walk. Who had arranged the circle? Who had placed the bundles? The investigation found no footprints in the cleared soil. The sisters had no memory of the arrangement. Claire, when shown photographs of the bundles, was quiet for a long time and then said, "That's what it looked like before." On day 9, when the first one was left, the bundles were consistent with traditional offerings documented in the ethnographic literature of several Pacific Northwest indigenous nations, including the Kalapuya people, whose ancestral territory includes significant portions of what is now the Willamette National Forest. There is no record of active traditional practice in this specific area. The nearest enrolled members of Kalapuya-affiliated tribes were contacted and declined to comment formally. One elder, speaking off the record, said only, "The forest keeps people sometimes, and then it gives them back." The 4 bundles are currently held in an evidence locker at the Lane County Sheriff's Office. The case remains open. Mara Aldren was discharged from Peace Health Sacred Heart on November 15, 2024, 23 days after being found. She moved in with her mother in Corvallis. She returned to work at her agency in February 2025, part-time at first. Her co-worker Denise Parr said she was the same, just more there somehow, like she takes up more space now. But quietly. She has not spoken publicly about what happened. Claire Aldren was discharged on November 8th. She returned to the University of Oregon the following January and completed her degree in June 2025. Her senior thesis, submitted in May, was titled Ecological Indicators of Old-Growth Forest Stability in the Western Cascade Range, a Field Study. It contained no direct reference to the disappearance. In the acknowledgments, she wrote, "To the forest for the time." She was asked in one subsequent interview whether she would ever go back to the Three Sisters Wilderness. She said, "I never left." Gerald Fitch still volunteers on the McKenzie River Trail. He was awarded the Oregon State Sheriff's Association Citizen Recognition Award in March 2025. In his acceptance remarks, he said he didn't want to talk about heroism because he had only done one thing. He had stopped walking when something told him to stop. He said, "I've thought about what would have happened if I'd kept going, if I'd been a little less tired or a little more focused on my task. I've thought about it a lot. I don't have anything useful to say about it except that I'm glad I had bad knees." Diane Aldren, their mother, was asked by the same Register Guard reporter who had covered the search whether she felt the experience had changed her daughters. She thought about it for a while. Then she said, "When they were little, both of them used to sleepwalk. I'd find them in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, completely asleep, making themselves a snack. And when I'd bring them back to bed and they'd wake up in the morning, they'd have no memory of it, but they'd always look rested, more rested than usual, like wherever they'd been while they were walking had been genuinely restful in a way that regular sleep wasn't. That's what they look like now," she said, both of them. Like they went somewhere while they were gone. And it was not terrible. On a morning in late March 2025, a Forest Service trail crew conducting spring maintenance on the McKenzie River Trail found a section of Section 7 that had been subtly altered overnight. 17 young Pacific yew saplings had been transplanted in a rough semicircle around the base of a massive old-growth Douglas fir, a tree that, when its GPS coordinates were checked against Gerald Fitch's original 911 call location, turned out to be the same tree. The saplings were healthy, properly planted, mulched with bark and pine duff. No tools were found nearby. The ground showed no tire tracks, no deep boot prints, no evidence of organized group work. The saplings were transplanted with a level of care, root orientation, soil composition, appropriate spacing, that botanists consulted by the Forest Service described as expert. There was no explanation. The Forest Service decided not to remove the saplings. A crew member speaking anonymously said, "Whatever it was done right. Those trees belong there. They are still growing." At the base of the fir, partially worked into the root system where the bark meets the soil, someone had placed a single smooth stone. On one face, a mark, The same mark, Claire Aldren said when shown the photograph, as the stone that had been left near the den on week 6. She could not say what it meant. She said, "I think it means I was here. I saw you. You were not alone." She paused. Then she said, "Which is, I think, all any of us are really trying to say."
And that's where we'll leave this story for tonight. What really happened to Mara and Claire out there in the forest, maybe we'll never fully know. Maybe some places keep their secrets. But one thing is certain, they survived something that still doesn't make sense, even to the people who lived through it. If this story stayed with you, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. What do you think they experienced during those 93 days? And who or what left those symbols in the forest? If you enjoy mysterious disappearances, unsettling true stories, and deep documentary-style investigations like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more stories like this. Thanks for watching. See you in the next case.